I know you do have a program in front of you, but I thought it would just be right to read a little bit of what Ealing's background is. Professor Law obtained her PhD from Cambridge University. As I've said, she's the Dean of Teacher Education and the Professor of Applied Linguistics and Teacher Learning at the National Institute of Education, which is similar to our National Institute of Education Development, NIED. In Singapore, their NIED, so to speak, fall under the University of, or Nanyang University. She is Singapore's representative for the Global Education Innovation Initiative of the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Education 2030 Initiative. She was also invited by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information of the Kingdom of Jamaica and the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030 to speak at the 11th Policy Dialogue Forum held in Montego Bay. So you will all agree with me that Professor Ealing is a very well qualified person to speak with us on the issue of teacher education and development today. So give me or join me in a big hand of applause for Professor Ealing.
Thank you so much, Charmaine, for that very kind introduction. I must also say that I first met Dr. Villette in Jamaica, where I had the pleasure of being one of the panelists where she was the organizer. And since then, I think we have really been kindred spirits in education and teacher education for the purpose of improving education for all. A very good morning, Honorable Minister, Vice Chancellor, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, fellow keynoters as well. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to be here today. I'm only given 30 minutes, so I better get on with it. I've been asked to share about the topic on teacher education in the 21st century, rethinking values, skills, knowledge, and competencies needed. I would be the first to say that even as I'm delivering this keynote right here, we are also thinking of the self-same issues in Singapore, and I'll share more with you later on. Okay, let's hope that 21st century digital technology works. It does! Okay. Thank you very much to the technical team as well for your kind assistance during the break. The late Professor Stephen Hawking, arguably one of the best and most renowned theoretical physicists of our time, had this to say in the 20th century about the 21st century, that the 21st century will be a century of great complexity. Why do you think he talked about this century as one to be of great complexity? Well, there are several reasons, and I think that ultra-connectivity is one of the real reasons why we live in a complex and interconnected world. Obviously, there is also a lot of benefit from being connected one to the other, but this increased connectivity, first of all, is caused by forces of globalization, the technological affordances of the internet, ultra-urbanization across small as well as huge countries, and all of this means that we are increasingly connected one to the other. We know that today it is extremely difficult to be a politician, but also even to be a teacher in the classroom, because it is extremely easy for what we do in the privacy of our classroom to be beamed live on social media with or without the intended context. This also gives rise, and I'll elaborate a little bit on later on, to the unintended as well as intended digital footprint that we leave behind in everything that we do today. So against this context, I thought it was useful for us to look at the top 10 skills that employers want, as prepared by the World Economic Forum report, just 2 years apart, but one predicting something that employers were looking for in 2015 on the left, and what they're possibly looking for in 2020. Although the report was published in a span of just 2 years apart, you can see that the top 5 skills have differed already so quickly. So looking at the left, you see The top 5 skills as complex problem solving, in 2015 I'm talking about, coordinating with others, people management, critical thinking, and negotiation. Looking on the right, you still see that complex problem solving reigns supreme. And recently, just before I came to Namibia, I had the pleasure and honor to deliver a commencement speech for De La Salle University Manila's graduation, 186th commencement ceremony. And I did mention to them that the first key that I wished for all their young graduates is to be a good problem solver or problem solutionist at the very least. Because this is clear that in 2020, being a very good complex problem solver is extremely important. Moving forward, you see critical thinking, creativity, people management, and coordinating with others as the top 5 skills. So I did a bit of mapping about the ones that were literally evergreen. Evergreen meaning today, 5 years is half an age, and 10 years is almost an age because of the quick breakneck speed at which technology is moving. So all this is changing very, very quickly. So again, you can see the matching, and because I've spoken quite a little bit about this in the last slide, I will not elaborate on it. But very quickly, I want you to also be acquainted with what the OECD is thinking about in their Education 2030 that they call the Learning Compass, work of which I'm also very much involved in. And I had the pleasure of being invited to speak at their OECD conference in Beijing about 2 weekends ago. So I have the latest about what they're thinking in terms of Education 2030. And surely, as we try to increase the quality of teacher education, preparation, professional development, we do need to keep abreast of what is happening worldwide. So the OECD 2030 framework defines 2030 as a learning compass. First of all, the focus is on competencies. So what to them is competencies? Competencies would not be just the acquisition of knowledge and skills, but it must necessarily also involve the mobilization of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values to meet the complex demands of future-ready students. So you realize very quickly in the graphic that I've prepared for you that competence is about knowledge, skills, attitude, values, and if you look at the detailed documents, it's about dispositions as well. These have important considerations for us as we try to prepare teacher educators for the 2030. I like the concept of transformative competencies that they mentioned about as well. There are 3 transformative competencies that they talked about, but I will give you my own spin and understanding about what each of these transformative competencies mean for us today. Creating new value. I think Vice Chancellor shared that today we want our teachers, and you will see later on in my vision and our vision for teacher education for Singapore is exactly that. We want teachers to be creators of knowledge, not merely transmitters. And I think this resonates with the first transformative competency of being able to create new value. Today, we teachers and teacher educators and educators as a whole and our young learners are preparing learners for a future global workplace and society that is unknown, that is complex, and for jobs that have not even been created. We need to give them the tools to be able to think creatively about complex solutions, to be able to look at patterns and propose solutions, innovative solutions that can take society forward. To do that, they must also be very good at pattern analysis, looking at trends from the past. So this, I feel, is very important as a first transformative competence, which is that of creating new value to the global workplace, society, and community that we will be living in 2030. Moving forward, the second transformative competency resonates very well with the young voices that have spoken to us about what they do not need in teachers. What they do not need would be teachers who are not able to reconcile the tensions, the dilemmas, the prejudices that we face in today's world. We need teachers who are able to help them, young learners, to make sense of the dilemmas, tensions, conflicts that we face, and to be able to respond in a manner that does not disrupt public and world peace. This is extremely important. And I think the young voices have spoken to us. And here, you also have a very authoritative document. OECD Education 2030 is the result of work from 36 different countries. They have triangulated their findings with interviews from policymakers all the way to the learner seated in the center of the classroom, which is why you would see a lot of resonance between the voices of our young learners and what is expressed in this Education 2030 framework. The third competency is also extremely important, and that is taking responsibility. That when we prepare young learners to be ready for the 21st century workplace and society, they need to be able to make considered decisions and to take responsibility for those decisions, and including absorbing the impact of the decisions that they've made. And to do this, some of the broad attributes that they might need, articulated here in the cogwheels, would be responsibility, a strong sense of morals about what is right or wrong, problem solving again, as well as self-regulation. I've heard enough educational psychologists speak at international conferences, and they have shared that being able to self-regulate does predict a child's future success. And this is not just academic success, but success in living as well. And as we go on to the later part of my presentation, I will slowly try to elucidate what I am also thinking in terms of what the goals of education might be for 2030. So with that broad framework that I've painted internationally, I would like to zero in on what we're doing in Singapore. I'll be the first to say that Singapore is a very small country. I know that Namibia, beautifully, is one of the second least populated cities in the world. And I think this is so beautiful because I think we are the opposite. We're one of the most densely populated cities in the world, especially in Asia. We are, I must also say, a very small city, nation, and country of only about 5 million people. We have about 3.5 million people, and we have about 360 to 370 schools, and only about 33 to 34,000 education officers or teachers in our workforce. So I'll be the first to say that we are a very small system. And when I speak to huge countries and huge continents, I can only say that we are humbled and we have much to learn from around the world. We do emphasize greatly on education because we are a small and young nation with only about 53 to 54 years of independent history. And we realize very quickly that we don't even have natural resources except that of human capital. Again, something which resonates very much with the speakers from the opening ceremony. So if you only have human capital as your resource, you have to grow your human capital, you have to treasure them, grow them, so that you can maximize the potential of each and every human in your society. For that reason, we spend a huge part of our national budget on education, next only to defense. So that's the context. Again, it seems like I'm preaching to the converted, speaking to kindred spirits, because Vice Chancellor mentioned that if you really want a high-quality teaching workforce, you do have to recruit the best and the brightest. And I would like to add, with the right aptitude and attitude into the teaching workforce. And that's exactly what we have done. In Singapore, we have done this for quite a number of years. And what we do is, first of all, the top 30% of each elementary one cohort would qualify for higher education. From there, we are now looking, in terms of just grades alone, the top 15% for our Premier Teaching Scholars Program, the main components of which I will paint as a case study of an innovative program in a little while. So what happens is, Linda Darling-Hammond, in a study that we did collectively on high-performing empowered educators across the world in 6 high-performing nations, chose Singapore as one of the case studies, and I was in charge of it together with currently the Hong Kong Dean at HKU, Professor Lynn Goodwin, and Linda herself. And what she did was to say that, I would like to challenge you to say you are accepting even more than the top 15% or the top 30%, because McKinsey & Co., an internationally well-known consulting company, has said that the selection interview rates that they've published is 1 in 8, because they are very strict. The selection panel is very strict in terms of screening for aptitude, attitude, and personality. Typically, these selection interview panels are chaired by principals or vice principals currently serving or recently retired, a Ministry of Education human resource personnel, and a faculty member from the National Institute of Education. We also believe in investing in the education of teachers. So all our pre-service teachers are paid, not just have their tuition fees paid, but they're also paid a monthly stipend as they go through our programs. We believe in compensating them well, but not overly. So we admit that we cannot pay them as much as beginning doctors and lawyers, but we certainly do peg their beginning salaries to that in our country of beginning engineers and accountants, so that it is a well-respected profession. So this is our vision for teacher education. When I took over last year, I made the bold vision that for us, why are we doing teacher education? Our vision is to prepare future-ready teachers for future-ready learners. So what does the envisioning of future-ready graduates of teacher education look like? They must be creators of knowledge, not merely consumers, facilitators of learning, not merely transmitters. And they must be active architects and designers of the learning environments, not merely implementers of what they find in the classroom. And this is extremely important. Fourthly, and I'm beginning to think that honestly this really should be the first, they must be shapers of characters through their own personhood as teachers. They must be custodians of societal values, not merely participants. And finally, eventually we want them to lead the next wave of educational change and not merely be followers of curriculums and policies that have been given to them. So with that bold vision, we do have to realize that vision. We also articulated, as a National Institute of Education, under the directorship of our new director, Professor Christine Goh, teacher education for life. There is a pun for life, as in the preposition FOR, as well as for lives, as in 4 different types of lives. What are these 4 lives? First of all, teacher education must be a lifelong endeavor. There must be multiple pathways, both for initial teacher education as well as continuing professional development as teachers walk through their careers. And I'll be the first to share that Singapore is one of the few jurisdictions, along with, I think, Ontario, Canada, for example, and a few others, where we have developed 3 career tracks for teachers: the teaching track, the leadership track, as well as a specialist track. In so doing, we hope that young teachers can aspire to grow within the teaching profession without feeling like they are stuck in the classroom all of their lives. But if they choose to want to teach, because that is where they make impact, they can stay in the teaching track, but they will be promoted and they will teach a wider community of learners and be involved in the professional development of teachers within their zones, their clusters, and nationwide. So that's the teaching track. The leadership track, of course, for young people who have entered into teaching, they are all very excited, but I always remind them that there's only one Director General of Education. But there is promotion along the leadership track. School leadership, again resonating with what Vice Chancellor just said, is not left to chance. School leadership is carefully planned at a very young stage. When teachers are into their careers, there is an appraisal panel which talks about their current estimated potential, how they see themselves, and how the group of reporting officers see them and what they can achieve. And it is not through years of seniority. Once they are identified for the leadership track, they will also be put through milestone leadership programs to prepare them for their future jobs as heads of department, as well as school leaders, as principals and vice principals. Moving on to the next life, which is life-wise. It is very important that teacher education builds the professional ethos, values, and personhood of the teacher through mentorship. I think teaching, unlike any other fraternity, is about the responsibility to grow the next generation of teachers. It is our responsibility as educators and as professional teachers to grow the next generation of teachers. Life deep teacher education is about building the professional and deepening the professional expertise of the teacher. And I will talk a little bit about what we do through our professional practice and inquiry project, which is a digital portfolio, and through the deepening of the Singapore teaching practice. Again, these are concepts that I will go through very quickly in a little while. Finally, life deep. If we want our teachers to be 21st century ready for our 21st century learners, they cannot be teaching within the confines of the classroom. Therefore, teacher education cannot just take place within the confines of just the campus or even the school. We need to provide them with multiple perspectives, authentic, real-world classroom through the affordances of internet, for example, the Internet of Things, but more than that, opportunities to go abroad. So for that reason, we have also introduced the International Exchange and International Practicum, which we feel is extremely important to build a multicultural and global awareness of the world around us. It is also important to expose our student teachers to both digital as well as multimodal literacies, because our young learners today are digital natives, unlike many of us who were educated in the late 20th century. Very importantly, in Singapore, we liken the role of teachers to nation builders. And this is an extremely important message. And it also creates a lot of respect. It has been the case since we were fully independent in 1965, all the way to the present. So today, as a teacher educator, if I were to drive into my campus, if I'm riding behind the bus of the Ministry of Education, trying to advertise for the next generation or next batch of teachers, it is not uncommon for me to see on the billboard, teachers shaping the future of our nation, one student at a time. So this is a very bold messaging that teachers are nation builders. I've seen this in one other jurisdiction, Finland. And I'm sure you will hear my colleague talk about the Finnish education system and teacher education program tomorrow. So in line with the need to build the strong ethos, personhood, and professionalism of the teacher, and what it really means to be a teacher, we need to think about the knowledge of a teacher moving even beyond just pedagogical content knowledge to the epistemic knowledge of a teacher. To give an example, a scientist is not someone who just carries out experiments, but they need to think up of problems that they want to experiment on and design the experiment to prove or disprove their concept. That is the epistemic knowledge of a scientist. For a teacher, we need for the teacher to understand what it means to be a teacher. A teacher's role is 24/7. You can't say that after school, you are no longer a teacher. What did the young voices say? They want teachers who are role models, right? Both inside and outside the classroom. If they see their teachers behaving like someone who is not well, who has no good values, for example, scolding people when they are a bit impatient on the road, right? Honking loudly and not behaving in a good way, even though it's out of school hours, they would lose respect instantly for that teacher. So the personhood of the teacher becomes very important. And that is the central pillar, a three-pronged set of pillars that we have proposed as the underpinning philosophy of our teacher education model for the 21st century. Very quickly, the three values stand for learner-centeredness as value paradigm 1. Learner-centeredness means that at the end of all our educational endeavors is the learner seated right in the center of our classroom. And we have some young learners here to remind us that everything that we do must be for improving their learner outcomes, number 1, and 2, for helping them to maximize life's potential in the future. So we must never lose sight of learner-centeredness. The second value paradigm, as Linda Darling-Hammond's great research on international teacher education has shown us, is a strong sense of teacher identity, or teacher pride. Pride to be a teacher. I'm proud to be a teacher and not embarrassed that you joined teaching because you couldn't get into medicine, law, or anything else. This is because research literature has shown that teachers with a very strong sense of identity are A, likely to stay longer in the profession, which means it predicts teacher retention rates, and 2, likely to contribute back towards the profession as well. And this brings me very nicely to the third value paradigm, which is service the community and profession. Teaching, unlike any other profession, is about mentorship, apprenticeship, and role modeling and growing the next generation of teachers. Then wrapped around these values and skills are what I would see as slightly changing skills and knowledge of the 21st century, which we can update from time to time as we do our local and global educational scans. So what does this look like in our teacher education program? I myself had to present before the Ministry of Education before I came about my future ready model for teacher education. And I had to speak so quickly that the Ministry of Education official said, even listening to you, we are a little bit breathless because we know that you're trying to pack so much into your 4-year program, which I consider a dream program. And I thank the ministry for giving us the funding to be able to do all of this. So for future-ready teachers, if you look at the wheel, let's start with the pink or red sector or segment. Teacher professionalism is about a very strong sense of values-based education, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. Then moving on to rigorous programs. Pre-service teacher education has to take place in an intentional and rigorous manner. There must be a very strong theory-practice nexus if it is going to be a university-based teacher education model like that in UNAM as well as in Singapore. So if there must be a tight theory-practice nexus where students, teachers are helped to see that what they learn on campus is applicable to the classroom, for example. And then innovative pedagogies. I like to put the word innovative in inverted commas because we know that technology moves so quickly. What is innovative today, by tomorrow might become obsolete. Some of our thinking right now is that there must be a deep inquiry base. We must have authentic and experiential pedagogies. We need to scaffold for self-directed learning. The role of the teacher is to scaffold for self-directed learning because at the end of the day, all of us have to be lifelong learners. And finally, of course, we need to tap on the technological enhancements and learning environments. But we must not let technology lead pedagogy. It should be pedagogy that leads technology. Moving forward, some of the multiple perspectives that we aim to provide. All our student teachers are involved in community involvement projects, either locally or abroad. They have an opportunity to do an international practicum posting of 5 weeks abroad, which is their non-final practicum, as well as semester exchanges abroad. On top of which, we have about 88 local partners, both within and outside the fields of education, even Ritz-Carlton Singapore. And all of these organizations, I have a medical evacuation company that allows my student teachers to intern with them. The reason being that if you want your teachers to be future ready, you do need to expose them to contexts that are outside of the classroom. Moving to the next orange bar, which is professional practice. I will talk a little bit more about this, but I think the clinical practice of the practicum, we call that to be the spine of our teacher education program because demonstrating your competencies in the classroom, after all, is very important for the teacher. I would now like to move very quickly to some of the new directions in the Singapore education landscape that took place after I took over as Dean of Teacher Ed. So I'm having to think about how teacher education would look like in this new landscape. So we have moved through different phases of education. We're now into the Learn for Life remaking pathways. And I quote our Minister for Education, who at first was only in charge of higher ed, but since about 2018, he's now in charge of K-12 as well as higher ed. And I quote, "Learn for life is a value, an attitude, and a skill that our students need to possess. It is fundamental in ensuring that education remains an uplifting focus in society." So what are some of the tangibles I'd like to mention too? Number one, as a nation, we know that our students do very well in internationally benchmarked tests of student performance like PISA, but that really is not enough. We need to recalibrate the overemphasis on assessment with bringing out the joy of learning. So we are happy to compromise that if we need to teach less content because we want our student teachers to be good, or rather our pupils and learners to be good problem solvers, we will do that. And we have taken bold steps, which I will share in a while. The other thing that we have done is, in order to do this, there are real tangibles. So we used to test our learners every 6 months. Mid-year examinations, final year examinations. We've now done away with mid-year examinations, and you can see progressively how this is done. I'll leave you to read the details for the non-final years in each level. Mid-year examinations are done away with. Okay. So what does this really mean for us in teacher education? One of the things that we've had to do is to rethink. So the first thing that I did very unpopularly is assessment transformation. Asking my faculty to think of the purpose, limiting the number of accessible components, as well as the modes of assessment. I believe that teacher educators must first model what alternative and authentic assessment modes are. So I've begun this very gently, in line also with our parent university, Nanyang Technological University's outcomes-based teaching and learning, what they call OBTL, learning outcomes. So everyone has been extremely cooperative and have reduced the number of accessible components and introduced more authentic forms of assessment. But this is just a thought which I'm thinking about for 2030. To me, for 2030, I really have to ask myself a very, very deep question. Not for the 4-year program where they're getting their first degree as well as teaching certification, but another route that our student teachers take is the 16-month postgraduate diploma in education, or PGDE, which is modeled after the United Kingdom's PGCE program, which means they all have basic degrees. I'm thinking that for the PGDE program, how are we going to think about assessment? Do I really need them to write another assignment to prove that they are literate? Or do I really need them to demonstrate teaching competencies and values and dispositions as soon as possible? And what might that look like? If any of you have answers, I'll be very happy to speak more with you. Secondly, it is also about differentiated instruction for different learner profiles, both their academic profiles as well as the mainstreaming of special ed needs, which there are 2 areas people have asked me in international platforms, where do you think that Singapore education needs to do better? No system is perfect. The minute you think you're perfect, you've actually stopped learning. And that's extremely important. So 2 areas that we are really working on as a nation would be special education needs as well as early childhood education. Third, I'm thinking of playing on VAR, which is very futuristic. Learning for life pedagogies would be definitely values-based. And you look at what I have on the right, the teacher education talks about starting from myself, examining why I became a teacher. And we have a personal and professional development project known as the Maranti project, which all student teachers have to undergo. It then moves on to the community through the community involvement project that they all have to enact. And then it moves on to their nation. And we have a core course known as Singapore Kaleidoscope, which makes use of appreciative inquiry for student teachers to reflect about the culture, heritage, and at the end of it, they do not produce an assignment, but an artifact of what they think represents what is quintessentially Singaporean. And I've turned all their artifacts into a book to honor their work. I only wish that I could have at least some e-copies of the book to show, but I can always send it on. So the A stands for authentic, and I've mentioned this. We must use the world as our classroom. And R stands for relevance. In today's context, there are 2 things that really leap out at us. First, digital and multimodal literacies, as well as constantly having the theory-practice nexus through an evidence-informed perspective. So teacher education must continue to rely on evidence. So I'm going to move forward because a lot of this is just elaboration, which I don't have time to do. And I did speak on it very quickly. Perhaps one slide on the professional teaching and learning electronic or digital portfolio. When they're with us at pre-service, it is their learning portfolio. They showcase what they've learned at pre-service, whereas at the practicum or clinical practice, it is their showcasing portfolio to show the schools and cooperating teachers what they've learned at pre-service. And when they exit our portals as beginning teachers, it is transported seamlessly to become the beginnings of their professional teaching portfolio, so that we hope that this can accompany them through life and they can then build a very proud professional portfolio from the day they entered pre-service all the way as they progress into the profession. This is the Singapore teaching practice, which is very affectionately modeled after our national flower, the Vanda Miss Joachim orchid. What it really is that it aims to be a description of the effective teaching and learning practices that we have conducted in Singapore, but it also teaches our students, before they go out for the practicum, the what, why, and the how of teaching. And each of the petals would be known as learning areas or teaching areas, where student teachers will not just be informed by international literature. For example, motivating learners would have to depend on self-determination theory, but is also informed by local research on what are the learning profiles of our learners in our Singapore schools and how they can contextualize all of that. And this is in order to have a common language for when they're in pre-service all the way to when they become beginning teachers. In order for them to be really 21st century ready, you need to transform the physical infrastructure. For this reason, each and every one of our tutorial classrooms look like this. It is not about, I read somewhere or I attended a conference where a lot of people have said that the irony is that we have said so much about 21st century education, but our 21st century classrooms look so much like early 20th century classrooms with desk tables, which maybe are a bit modernized, but literally still facing the teacher. So in this physical transformation, you will find a lot of use of plasma television sets that have also decreased in pricing as the years have gone by. But what I would like to highlight is, where is the teacher? The teacher is no longer the sage on stage, but literally and metaphorically the guide on the side. And his or her little console is just right at the corner that you can't even see, because he or she should not be seated, but should be going around in these small groups, facilitating collaborative learning. So my last slide, which I will end here with, to give the respondent enough time to respond, is about the Teaching Scholars Program. So how does it all come together? For learning beyond the classroom, and some of it I've mentioned, we have BUILD, which is Building University Interns for Leadership Development. That is our local internship 5-week program outside and within the fields of education. Service learning, which is our community involvement projects. Personalized learning, we observe this in the Oxford-Cambridge model, where every one of our student teachers is paired with a professor or faculty member in their primary area of disciplinary expertise. So I, myself, even as dean, have one-on-one mentoring with my teaching scholars. The idea is that I can slowly introduce them to the world of academe, help them to present at international conferences, take them along, as well as help them to present and write up in future for journal papers. The Global Edge I mentioned about all the international practicum semester abroad opportunities and the international practicum. Head Start, for those who are very bright, we create a pathway for them to begin their master's degree programs through completing at least 2 courses out of the 10, even whilst they're doing their undergraduate study. Building connections with the other Premier Scholars Program within the university, it is listed as one of the 4 Premier Scholars Program within the Nanyang Technological University. Innovative pedagogies I've talked about. And this is important. Building research opportunities is important because underpinning our model is to build a deeply inquiring, reflective practitioner who in the future is able to research into their own practice for the benefit of improving student learning outcomes. For that, we do a little bit of an overkill for student teaching. They have to do 2 research projects, 1 academic thesis in their own disciplinary expertise, and an educational research project, where they do need to do an education research project about an educational issue that they've observed, maybe perhaps during their teaching and clinical practice, propose a solution, trial a solution, and write up about it. So that, in a nutshell, is what I have time to share. Perhaps leaving you with 2 parting shots. The evaluation, I understand that one of you is also in academic quality. That was my previous portfolio, Head of Strategic Planning and Academic Quality, and then Chief Planning Officer. Let me tell you that it's much easier to dream strategically than to implement, but as Dean of Teacher Ed. But I can also say that becoming the Dean of Teacher Ed, it really is me putting in the effort and showing that you are worth what you have dreamed of and said, because it is always easy to dream, not easy to implement. And in order to be a very good program, apart from high quality entrance, we also have very strict teaching and learning assessment of the academic groups. But what I need to highlight is that there are a lot of quality evaluation surveys. Each and every student teacher is given a quantitative and qualitative survey, entry and exit of their program. And then there's something called the Graduate Preparedness Survey, which they fill in not more than 12 months into teaching, as they look back into our programs and tell us what was useful and what needs enhancement. Thirdly, to triangulate, the Ministry of Education also wants us to conduct a stakeholders survey, where the school leaders and teachers who receive our beginning teachers get to comment about the quality of our graduates and what else can be improved. So it is a whole evaluation cycle for the purpose of upholding academic quality in our programs and continually enhancing it. Concluding thoughts. The success of any education system must be linked to enhancing student learning outcomes. But let's ask ourselves, what are the desired outcomes that our students would need in the 21st century and beyond? For one, we know that education is for life, not about just making a living. And we need to redefine success. Success is not high achievement in internationally benchmarked tests of student achievement, but if our students are able to dream up creative solutions to solve complex, unknown problems of the future, that, to me, means that we have succeeded in our roles as educators. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention.
Wow, what a lot to think about and comprehend. And doesn't it inspire you? Yes, you want to go and make a difference right now. Thank you, Iling. I'm now calling on our Executive Director, Ms. Annette Steenkamp, to respond to this presentation. Good luck, Annette.
Thank you, esteemed ladies and gentlemen. I wish to stand on the protocol. There's nothing as lovely to stand on the protocol, but I wish to say thank you, Professor Iling. Really very well articulated. You can see the passion coming through, and if that passion goes into the teacher education, then amazing results that we will see. So I really want to just very briefly say that for the past 3 weeks, since the 16th of October, I think Namibia has been engaging in the very critical issues of sharing, first and foremost, information from the Ministry of Basic Education, Arts and Culture on the curriculum reform. And then just last week, we had as well the Open and Distance Learning Conference that looked at the role of open and distance e-learning in the fourth industrial revolution. And from there, today we have the teachers in Indaba. I think so. Give ourselves a round of applause. We're finally there where we are interrogating very critically issues very close to our hearts. And although I missed the first part of the discussion at the open and distance learning, some of the key issues that were mentioned here came through very pertinently. It is the e-learning, the use of technology, and how you use that in an ethical manner, but also not losing the human value of empathy, ethics, equity. Those are critical things that we should not lose sight of. Now, I really, today's this strengthening of teacher education, I think the best people to respond on issues of teacher education are with us in this room, and the answers are with us. And this week will provide us really where we have to look and reflect deeply into the level, the quality of our teacher programs, and whether indeed our teacher programs are preparing the teachers to be future fit and the learners equally, as the question was asked, to be future fit. Now, many can turn it around and say, well, it's the learners that you push out of the system that become the teacher. And Professor Matengo is not here. And I told him during break time, you were ruffling some feathers. And some of those feathers were mine. When he talks about, and duly so, about the cohort of teachers entering the training, the teacher training, and the reasons for them entering. However, I would also like to state that among us here today, we have teachers who are here because they have the love for the profession. And in front of you stands a woman who started off her career as an unqualified teacher for 2 years. And I realized that we were actually working much harder than some qualified teachers. So the issue that was raised here this morning of having a professional council, it's pertinent. And I think the unions and the two ministries having to work coherently, and there will be no denial that that is a critical starting point. The issue of educator policy that is inclusive of that of a teacher, but also of lecturers, it's something that will still happen, once the Education Act is approved. Now, if we look at Singapore, fascinating, 5 million people, 360 schools. Million people, 360 schools. Let's look quickly a little bit into the context of Namibia. Okay, 2.4 million people. How many schools? By next year, 2020, we will have more than 1,900 schools scattered across the country. By next year, 2020, because the examination board already approved for the expansion of some schools. If we look at the value that the government of Singapore adds, you can almost compare that to Namibia, because for us in Namibia, we have the political commitment, and government biggest chunk, 21% of the Namibian national budget goes into education. Now, how do we spend that money? Now, Professor Iling talked about this, having the strategies, but the difficulty of implementing. How do we spend the money at the moment in the system? So 83% of the money that we spend, ladies and gentlemen, goes towards personnel expenditure. For the 30,000 teachers that we have in the system, having to serve more than 781,000 learners across 14 regions. So already of the 21% of national budget, most of it goes to the wage bill. 12% goes into an operational budget. That's what you have left for the major cost drivers of utilities in the many schools and hostels. That's what you have left in terms of school feeding programs, hostel caterings, textbooks, stationery, subsidies, because Namibia have, since 2013, declared that government will subsidize the schools and parents no longer have to pay for universal free education. And then you have 5% going to capital projects. So that need to be spent in a very meaningful way. Now, it has been said, and I want to go back to what Professor Iling said, and just connect how she started off the presentation. And the whole issue around one word, and that is complexity. And the World Economic Forum equally said that for the scale and the complexity and the urgency of today's global challenges that we experience, we would require much more responsive and responsible leaders who not only have the vision and the values that were so pertinently talked about, but also the character and the competence to shape the future while balancing the tensions between short and long-term goals. For me, that just perfectly took together the presentation that we just heard about what is required in today's world to prepare teachers for the 21st century classrooms, inclusive classrooms for that matter. The Honorable Minister this morning said pertinently, are we preparing teachers to be leaders? We have a system where we still have the great man theory around principalship. We've heard how Professor Matengo and Professor Ealing talked about that there are areas of grooming teachers, but also leaders and also specialists. Now, we know in our system that promotion for principalship usually has to do with seniority, your years of experience, and your qualifications. That is the path that is currently there. And that is for the whole school management. So the question is, are we preparing and are we leaving leadership totally with very severe and unintended consequences possibly in the hands of only one person in a hierarchy? Research has shown that most of the research that are done in our country are much more descriptive. And there's no much interventions. Are we preparing leaders, teacher leaders, that will run with a team leader at the school and not lock up the issue of leadership only in one person? This morning, the learners, and they were the stars, they set the tone. Every single thing, I talked about resources earlier on, but everything that the learners mentioned today, all of those are locked up in the teacher's code of conduct. How the teacher is guided, how we dress, how we engage with learners. If we have the teachers in our system that Prof was referring to, if we don't cross the professional boundaries as teachers, to have sexual relationship with learners, we can begin to restore the teaching profession. Because sadly, as was said also by the minister this morning, while we look into the issue of teachers and the quality of teachers, we do have teachers who cross the boundary. Why did 3 learners refer to teacher rapist? They are a minority. In the past 3 years, we discharged 12 teachers from public service because they had relationships with learners. There is a zero tolerance to that. So we are saying, how are we preparing teachers and how do we take the teachers into the system when children are living in a complex world, a world filled with uncertainty, tensions, the dilemmas that we just heard, cyberbullying, issues, not just cyberbullying, bullying, physical bullying at school, violent environments. How do we address that in our system? Now, in the ministry, there are sectoral issues. There's the issue of learner well-being and teacher well-being, HIV and AIDS prevention. We've got various policies in place that gives the girl child an opportunity to proceed with her schooling, despite the fact that she fell pregnant, the learner prevention and management policy. We now need to look deeply as a country as to the lone voice of the boy child. And what happens with the overemphasis, as it is perceived, of the girl child. Now, we have the integrated school health policies. And what the learners were also referred to were the issues around school sports and physical education. That more and more, working with Ministry of Youth, working with key stakeholders, are gaining momentum and attention in our ministry. There are basic things we talk about here, like water and sanitation. Water and sanitation. I'll go back a little bit. And then the most important one for me is the National Safe School Framework, where we have done an in-depth work with the teachers and various key stakeholders in coming up with a National Safe School Framework, which will not only create a place of safety for the learners, but equally for the teachers. Now, giving a little bit more context, Professor Matengo asked this morning, what does our teaching profession look like? I just want to very briefly tell you. In terms of the teacher-learner ratio, on primary level, we have a ratio of 1 teacher to 22 learners in Zambezi. It's about reallocating of teachers who are overstaffed, up to 31 learners in a class in Kavango. Now, that is just the teacher-learner ratio. That is not the reality in a particular school, where you have up to 47 children or 52 children in a class of 1 teacher and then 18 in a class of another teacher. So I want us to really distinguish in terms of the context on the ground and the realities. There are several factors that shape the implementation of our policy of teacher and learner ratio. It is the fact that new schools are opened in remote areas, a larger number of combined schools consisting teachers to split across phases, forcing teachers to split across phases, the lack of specialized teachers that we just heard about. There's a career track for teachers, and we still experience a lack of specialized teachers and then teachers' loads per subjects. Now, very interestingly, in 2017, now that we stand at 30,000 teachers in our system, both for private school, very few, and for public schools, guess how many of them are females? So out of 30,000, you've got 20,000 females. But what does the leadership hierarchy look like in terms of principals' positions? What does the hierarchy look like in terms of school management, head of departments? I'll leave that as food for thought. So, in terms of the teacher qualifications, at least 3,500 teachers in our system are either unqualified or underqualified. That's 11% of the teachers in our classrooms, of which 9% is at senior secondary level. And it is for that reason that the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture worked together with the University of Namibia to see how can we address the disparities of unqualified teachers in the system through a junior primary diploma that we're currently running with. So in terms of the regions, you will notice that disparities in the quality of primary education, we have in Kunene region, 68% of teachers are qualified, while in the Oshana region, a most sought after region, at least 88% of teachers are qualified. So basically, we are saying, in general, most teachers in secondary at least have 3 years, and most regions, 3 years of teacher qualification. Most regions range between 83% to 96% of qualified teachers. So, what are we saying? We should ask the critical questions that has been asked. And I want to return to the issues of inclusive schooling and the fact that Professor mentioned about differentiated instruction, special education, inclusive education. Before I get there, Professor Matengo also mentioned, and I will soon round off, Professor Matengo also mentioned that where are the qualified teachers? The qualified teachers, although incentives are paid for remote and rural schools in 3 different categories to attract and retain teachers, there are teachers who prefer not to go to remote areas. And we can attest to that. All the regional directors, 14 of them, have lists available where teachers can register and where they can be placed. I guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, that with the teacher vacancies that we advertised, they will still in March not be qualified teachers in specific schools. But it's also because teachers prefer technology. They first ask each other, is there Wi-Fi? Can I operate my smartphone there? Will I be connected? And rightfully so. Is there decent accommodation? And rightfully so. And those are some of the things that we're still lacking. Ladies and gentlemen, 2012 already, the European Agency for Development in Special Needs Education were putting together a profile of what it should look like for teacher educators to get into the system. And they did it based on the following question: what kind of teachers are needed for an inclusive society in the 21st century school? And what are the essential teacher competencies for inclusive education? I will not stand still on the definition of what an inclusive education is. We are all very familiar with that. Now, there were 4 core values relating to the teaching and learning of teachers in an inclusive education, regardless of the subject specialization or the age range the teachers will teach and the type of schools that they will work into. And these were also areas of competence and related attitudes and beliefs, as well as essential knowledge and crucial skills. There are 4 core values inclusive classroom in the 21st century. The first value is the valuing of learner diversity, that learner difference is considered a resource and an asset to education. Last week in the 4th Industrial Revolution discussions, it said that we will move away from STEM and we will go into STEAM, where we also bring in the issue of arts and culture. And the areas of competence is to have the conceptions of inclusive education that it's based on a belief, listen to this, in equity and quality, human rights and democracy for all learners, while the access to mainstream education, the participation and achievement for all learners is seen as non-negotiable. Isn't that exactly what the Namibian Education for All policy is all about? It's very well captured there in the areas of competence. The second thing is the teacher's view of formerly known as special needs schools. And yet, our Honorable Minister was asking the same question, and it was also brought up by Professor. In terms of teaching practice, you hardly have any teacher going to the resource schools. They shy away from going to the resource schools, where they work with learners with intellectual impairment, visual impairment, hearing impairment, physical impairment, etc. The second value I want to focus on, ladies and gentlemen, and I will wrap up, is supporting all learners. And the teachers have high expectations for all learners' achievements. And that's exactly what the learners said. Mold me. Be a role model to me. See me, I am here. I have a name. I'm somebody's child. I'm somebody's sibling. I have potential. Believe in me. I am here today, ladies and gentlemen, because of teachers who believed in me, who gave me an opportunity and who said, you can do it. Let us be that teacher. How does that respond to the areas of competence? That is when teachers can promote the academic, the social, and the emotional learning of all learners, irrespective of where they come from and what their dreams are. Effective teaching approaches were focused on. The third value is working with others. And this is something that's very important. How come do we have the creativity of young teachers stifled at schools? Because school management feel a little bit threatened by these new ideas, this new energy coming in. And we're stifling them, the innovative practices that they can come with. So we must learn really working with others. Collaboration and teamwork. These are essential approaches for all teachers. Get out of your classroom and get into another teacher's classroom, for heaven's sake. Go to a different school. Break through the barriers. You don't need your principal's permission to get into a different school. You don't need anybody's permission to be mentored and to serve as a mentor. So working collaboratively, equally with parents and families in equal partnership, because those are the stakeholders that we usually write off, the parents. Lastly, professional development, personal professional development. Over and over it came out. Issues of self-regulation, issues of confidence building. Teaching is a learning activity, and teachers take responsibility for their lifelong learning, trying to stay current, relevant, responsive to local and global needs. We must be very careful also that we have the issue of initial teacher education that is merely a foundation for ongoing professional learning and development. There's the issue of gaining the skills and the values, the knowledge, not just the issue of certification. And to put it on my name, that I have 2 master's degrees, 1 MBA, 1 master's in education, leadership, and management, and that I have 2 PhDs. Or that I have, the issue of certification. We need to also to guard against that. Ladies and gentlemen, having said this, we know that some things we have to be sensitive to our local context. And if you look, we must allow for local context to highlight particular points of concern in teacher education, such as, for example, the effects of language diversity and the issues of poverty in several Southern African contexts. That having said, ladies and gentlemen, I think in the end it's about doing what is right and what is just in the teacher education process with what the resources allow and what we can still seek for. I thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. A big round of applause for our speaker and respondent. Thank you. I want you to hold your questions for the plenary session. I do believe Professor Jansen is here. Welcome, sir. We've been looking forward to receiving you since yesterday. So now you are finally here, and we are very happy to see you. So I think we're going to move immediately into that plenary session. Dr. Naumap, you are the chairperson, and I will gladly hand over to you so that we all listen to what Professor Jansen has to tell us. Thank you. Can the rapporteur for this session also come up? I'm not too sure who that is. So this group will now move over there. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Professor, you may come forward, please. Thank you.
Allow me to stand on the protocol that was already established. My name is Errol Naumap, and I have the pleasure this morning to direct and chair this next session of the plenary, which focuses on constructing 21st century teacher education preparation programs. Part of this session aims to share the quintessential knowledge and expertise on the best practices for the design and delivery of teacher education programs for the 21st century teacher. You would see in the booklet that there are some essential questions that we need to address. I will highlight one such question, which is, what are the essential characteristics of a teacher preparation program that produce effective professional teachers for the 21st century? And this morning, to help us to understand, reflect, and capture these important discussions, we have a panel. We have a distinguished professor, Professor Jonathan Jansen. We do have as a respondent, Dr. Pumuti, and the rapporteur is Dr. Kamwanya. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, allow me to introduce the keynote address, the profile of the keynote address this morning. We have Professor Jonathan, who is a distinguished professor of education at the University of Stellenbosch and president of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He was recently fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University before serving as Vice Chancellor and Rector of the University of the Free State for 7 years. His research concerns the politics of knowledge in schools and universities, as reflected in book-length publications, and there are 3 listed here. From Knowledge in the Blood is one, to more recently, Inequality in South African Schools. And one last one that is listed here is the Politics of Decolonization. Knowledge in the Blood, ladies and gentlemen, won the largest book award from the British Academy for the Social Sciences and Humanities. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Jansen won the Africa Lifetime Achiever Award in New York and the Spend Love Award from the University of California for his contribution to tolerance, democracy, and human rights. Let us give him a deep round of applause. Before you come on board, Prof, his forthcoming book with Samantha Creer is titled, Who Gets In and Why? Very interesting. It's a study on the politics of admission in South Africa's former white school. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Professor Jansen.
Thank you for that very warm welcome. I must tell my secretary to send the short CV next time. Anyway, let me first get something straight. I am not a distinguished professor at Stellenbosch University because my letter of appointment was written by an Afrikaans tannie in HR, who obviously wasn't, very good at English. And so I've got this letter of appointment, which I am keeping for posterity, for my children's children. It says I am an extinguished professor of education. So please, can we just get that right? I am extinguished. I feel burnt out already. What a wonderful, wonderful treat to come into your beautiful country. You know, every time I come into Namibia, I feel good. You know why? You're not as aggressive as the South Africans on that side. You know? That is why you will never win in the World Cup rugby. Even your rugby team, they play apologetically, you know? You will never see a guy like Faf, you know, in your team who picks up, you know, the prop forward of the opposing team. You'll never find that. You are so calm. And as I often tell South Africans, we have no excuse for our aggression. Because we often say colonialism and apartheid. But you know, I say to them, what about the Namibians? They almost had a genocide of the Herero. But you don't see them fighting with everyone. They're just kind-hearted people. Sure, my next wife, I'm telling you, I'm taking you from Namibia, you know. It's going to be less stressful. Anyway, no, I just made that up. Anyway, it's lovely to be with you and to talk about something that that is very dear to my heart, which is teacher education. Is there a clicker, or what do they call these things? All right. So I'm going to start with a story about my granddaughter. This is my granddaughter, Zara, when she was 16 months old. Unfortunately, they're in Namibia at the moment. New Zealand. You know, the kids want to find out the rest of the world. So she's 16 months old. And so, of course, my instruction to her parents, to my son, and, oh, by the way, this picture causes a lot of trouble for me in South Africa. As you can see, she is the spitting image of her grandfather. You know, I walked with this kid the other day in Pretoria before they left, and all the white people look at me, and then I have to go to them and say, "Ek kan verduidelik." I can explain. Our country is messed up, eh? Our country is messed up. Anyway, so my daughter-in-law, Catherine, sent this picture, this photo, and I just want to check with the guys if you can play it. Most times, there's a little thing at the bottom there. Okay, click. All right, so sometimes in some countries it disappears. But let's go back there, don't worry about it. I'm going to tell you what happens. So what happens in this short video is Zara, that's her name, 16 months old, ladies and gentlemen, she goes to the curtain, opens the curtain, and the light comes in. 16 months. And you can see her thinking. And then she goes back to the curtain, closes it, and the light disappears. And she does this 3 or 4 times. Here is my question to you as teachers and teacher educators. What scientific principle has my granddaughter stumbled upon?
I have no idea.
No, you said no before I even came to you. What scientific principle has my granddaughter stumbled upon?
It's an inquiry.
Inquiry is not a principle. Ay. That's a concept. A principle is a relationship between 2 concepts. So she has discovered a relationship between 2 very potent concepts in grade 2 science. What scientific principle has my granddaughter stumbled upon?
Oh, observation.
Did you not hear what I just said? Are you also from the University of Cape Town? Who said that? Are you from the Free State? Oh, those are the only clever people. She's discovered cause and effect. Now understand this. She doesn't have concepts. In other words, she doesn't have language to be able to say cause and effect. But she understands there's something going on here that if X happens, then Y happens. Now, I want to remind you as educators about the power of learning. The reason your country is stuck, the reason my country is even more stuck, is because we don't believe in first principles when it comes to teaching and teacher education, which is the kids can learn. And they can learn powerfully. And that our role is to make that possible. Do you know what my greatest fear is for Zara? My greatest fear is that she goes to school. The school will take away the curiosity. The school will take away the enthusiasm. The school will tell her, no, says the math teacher. I told you there are 4 steps to solving this quadratic equation, not 3. Our schools are institutions for a reason. They're meant to contain you, like a prison. And so I remind you again about the power of learning resident in our children. I asked somebody the other day at a conference, why is Zara able to discover this? And this guy put up his hand. He said, because she's a Jansen. No. Good try, but all, grandfathers, all kids can learn. Did anybody see this picture before? You did? Yes. You know what happened here? It's my favorite picture. And you know why I like this picture? The man in the coffin is Zimbabwean. The pastor raising him from the dead is Congolese. The people fainting are South Africans. Now there's a story there. We are gullible. South Africans are gullible. Even more than you got your freedom in 1990. We only got our freedom in 1994. We were isolated from the world for so long that when we started to see the rest of the world, every crook from Nigeria, from Okahandja, wherever there were crooks, they came to South Africa because they knew that these people are gullible. Ask yourself, how did 3 Indian guys run off with half of our treasury? 3 Indian guys! The Guptas. We are gullible. But in teacher education and in schools and in university, we are also gullible. So let me just cut to the chase. Oh, it's going to get rough here for the next few minutes. Charmaine, jy het 'n groot fout gemaak om my uit te dooi. I never get invited twice to any place. Because I believe you must tell people what you see, and not lie to them. So this guy is clearly not dead. This is a scam. Shame, the poor guy did die a few weeks after that from pneumonia in Namibia. Yeah. He was almost there anyway, anyway. Start with, I was listening to government officials here and this colleague here today, and I praise you for your work and your leadership, but you sound so much like the South African government officials. They just, not you, they just talk and talk and talk. So let me just tell you something about change. You cannot talk about the 21st century teacher unless your government gives you schools that work. You cannot talk about the 21st century teacher when there are 30, 40, 50 kids in a class. You cannot talk about a 21st century teacher when it's hot. And I sat in those classrooms as I went in my first visit to Namibia up into the north. By the way, that was a scary visit. My first visit with a small little plane. And you land among the cows. And then I got to a place near the Caprivi Strip. I couldn't believe what I saw. Do you know what I saw there? No South African could explain this to me. I saw hundreds of FNB terminals. Can anybody explain that to me? Why, on the border with Zambia, would you find all these terminals, FNB terminals, ATMs? It was pay points for the South African Defence Force. So you see, we are more connected than you like to believe. My point, ladies and gentlemen, is I live in a country. I want to talk about Namibia because I still need to get out of here live. Why the hell do you guys still have these policemen stopping you when you come from the airport along the road? They've been doing that since I brought my students here many years ago. Anyway, we talk policy that is completely disconnected from the realities on the ground. In my country right now, everybody's talking about the 4th industrial revolution because the ruling party told the politicians, comrade, whenever you go and you speak, even if it's the funeral of another comrade, you must use the mantra, the 4th industrial revolution. How do I know they don't know what it means? Because I asked them what were the other three. They don't have a clue. They just know them as say, the fourth industrial revolution. Our students at university, they wanted change and we must have change. And I supported them. And every bloody student, we must decolonize the university. I said, I think that's right. I think that's very nice. What do you mean? We don't know, comrade. You must tell us, you professors. We just heard it somewhere. We must decolonize. You know, we use words, especially South Africans. We're good with slogans. We're good with slogans. Land expropriation without compensation. Between you and me, that would be nice. But it's not going to happen. Because it's a political slogan. It's not meant to change anything. And as Michael Fullan correctly says, that if your government, sorry, not Michael Fullan, Richard Elmo, correctly says, if your government says you must give 1 ounce of effort, tell them I'll do it if you give me 1 ounce of effort back. In other words, we're going to work together. So I don't believe every crap you hear about changing your schools unless your government faces up to our ghosts. So I'm going to give you 7 theses very briefly on the 21st century teacher. And the first thing I want to tell you is this. I've now worked as a dean, like Charmaine, I've worked as a vice chancellor, I've worked with education all my life. And let me tell you something. There's still something that to me is very, very important in the way we choose our student teachers. You have to choose student teachers who are passionate and who are driven to become teachers. Otherwise, get rid of them. The difficulty we face is that the people who often come into teaching do so because they didn't get into engineering, because they didn't get into medicine. And so you sit with these kids, bless their hearts, who become teachers for all the wrong reasons because it's better than staying at home. Now, at some point, we've got to change the incentive system so that the young people who do show up are those who really want to make a difference. In every society, you can go to Iran, you can go, of course, you can go to Finland, you can go to Guinea-Bissau. You will find a proportion of the population in that group, young people who definitely want to be. But I tell you something, I don't see passion. I don't see commitment. Certainly, let me talk for my own country. Do you know where I see passion and commitment? This is going to be very controversial, but I'm sorry. If you hung up on race, I see it in white Afrikaans schools. I don't see it in black schools. You go to they made a mistake the other day. I was dean, so they asked me to come and speak in Pretoria at the school, and they didn't know that Jansen was a black guy. So it means a huge mistake, but I got there, and they couldn't send me back home. So I get to the school, and it's a prize giving. Now, remember, I grew up in township schools, so I don't know about prize givings, and things like that. But it was an eye-opener for me. You know what I saw? The teachers, these white Afrikaans tannies, they had this prize giving, and I had to sort of, shake the hand of the kid. And the kid would come across, and suddenly I saw something that blew me away. I don't know if this happens in Namibia. The teacher dropped the prize. She ran towards the kid. She picked up this child. And said, "Oh, my twerkie, my skykie, ek was so trots op." I said, "What the fuck? Where am I?" What country did I wake up in? And she hugged the kid. I thought, there's something wrong here. And so what I did is I said to the principal, "Look, then tomorrow morning I'm coming back to your school, Centurion, the large school Centurion. I'm coming back tomorrow morning. But what you must not do is call the police, because I'll be sitting in my car, like I in your car, outside your school, and I just want to see what happens when the teachers come in." And ladies and gentlemen, this teacher came in with a blue Mazda. I'll never forget this as long as I live. And she came in, and she parked them. And as she gets out, these kids came from everywhere. And they ran towards her. And the one took a case, and the other one gave her an apple. The normal crap. But the excitement. I looked at the playground, and I saw this teacher. Do you know Afrikaans? White teachers, they don't walk. They call it a draf stappie. So I ran after this teacher and said, Juffrou, waar gaan jy? The enthusiasm, the passion, the excitement about teaching. And that is why if you come to the University of Stellenbosch today, right now, come to my office, you're welcome, by the way. You will see hundreds of white Afrikaans kids wanting to become teachers. And I've asked this survey for years in the Free State, in Pretoria, and now in Stellenbosch. Waarom het jy besluit om 'n onderwyseres te word? Why did you decide to become a teacher? It's always the same thing. My graad 7 geskiedenis onderwyser. My grade 11 mathematics teacher. In other words, there is somebody who made such an impression because of their passion and their commitment that they wanted to become like the teacher. Then I go to Mamelodi High School. How many of you want to become teachers? One guy at the back said, fuck off. No, serious. He said, my teacher told me, don't become like me. Now they are. And my word to you this morning is you are not going to attract teachers into the profession unless you show signs of life. Do I hear an amen? I'll do the altar call later. The 21st century teacher is somebody that has a sense of powerful learning. Not just learning, not rote learning, not repetition. You know, South African kids started this week writing matric exams. You know, they now call it the NSC, the National Senior Certificate. It means nothing. I know that as a university professor, it means nothing. You know why? Because all they do in those assessment exercises is to learn how to repeat what they learned, give it back, and that's why they fail like flies when they come into the first year of university, because they can't think. They've never been exposed to powerful learning. And by the way, who's to blame? You. I now do science. I'm a science biology, actually, but I do general science teaching with township mothers. And I take 6 mothers at a time. And I teach them 12 experiments in science so they can teach with, the kid must be 4 years old. You must try this. It's fantastic. And you don't have to use the word science. You just have fun with the kids. So I put a bath in front of all the mothers, and I put a kid in the bath, 4-year-old, and I said, experiment number 1. And I will take 12 different objects of different weight, and I would take it, and I would say to the kid in the bath, Sipo, will it sink? Or, will it sink? Or will it float? And the kid gets so excited because I'm teaching him prediction. I'm not teaching him about volume and density. I'm simply, which will come later, I'm simply teaching him how to predict in science. Kids have the ability for powerful learning, except we don't believe that. We had a president who had no high school, no education at all. He used to tell people, you don't need education, said President Zuma. Look at me, what I became. Which is a good point, actually. Don't become like that. Corrupt, venal, predatory. You see, the Afrikaans word for education is a beautiful word. It says opvoeding. It says something about being raised in a set of values. In my country, we teach kids mathematical literacy. Mathematical literacy. You know what one question was in the grade 12 mathematical literacy exam? On what day is Christmas? What the fuck? I'm not making this up. It's math for dummies. It's when you don't believe that every child can learn powerfully that you get up to the scrap. I hope you don't have a subject like this in Namibia. We got a subject called life orientation. What a load of crap. You know what my definition is for life orientation? It's the clap your mother should have given you on the way to school. It's not a subject in school. Don't waste their time. Teach them robotics. Teach them artificial. Do something with the kids, but don't tell them about how to be a good person. That's your job as a parent. Your behavior as a teacher will convince them about the higher life, not a bloody subject. But you're right. If you're having sex with the kids, that's a powerful message about how not to be. Who's laughing so much here behind me? Mine is fronted. That's her response. Number 3. We have to figure out a way, because many of our schools, let's be honest, are not functional. When I came to Namibia, I was amazed when I was recruiting for the University of the Free State. I used to come to Namibia and Zimbabwe because you have outstanding young people. And you know, the one day I would be in a school called Jan Moore. Jannie Moore for Sunny or something like that. And then the next moment I'm in a school called WhatsApp or WAP or something, where I just see white kids. Some academy. That was the weirdest school I visited in all of the world, because the principal had instructed the kids not to laugh at my jokes. And the kids were trying so hard. But I could see his eyes. I really hope you'd get rid of these all-white schools. It's not good for our kids. It's certainly not good for the white kids. This book that we just did, 83%, 93% white schools in the southern suburbs. From the City Bowl, where you have Rand van Riebeeck, believe it or not, that's the name of the school, all the way down to Paul Greiling in Fish Hoek. What the hell? 25 years after apartheid. And you have these inequalities built into the school system. And what we need to do is, when you put student teachers in schools that are dysfunctional, you have to make sure that they don't become like the school. Now, I know what I'm talking about, because my second teaching post was at a school called Trafalgar High School. I'll never forget it. There was no door. You walked through the door into the school. The kids were making out in the back row. I'm the new teacher. And I decided as a young teacher, I'm going to start shaking things up here. Number 1, sit in your fucking seat or it's the end of you. Number 2, you will pay attention when I teach. This is beginning until they started to become normal. Number 3, we are going, and I used half of my salary, which wasn't much, to make sure it looked like a science lab. And I walked across what was then Deval Drive to UCT to get test tubes and stuff so that I can at least teach them how to do a titration. In other words, and one day while I was busy, I never left before 6 at night. These 2 teachers, I can still see them, they walked past the door. I'll never forget this. They walked past my door, and as they walked, the one said to the other, for me to hear, new brooms. New brooms. Met ander woorde, just give him some time and he'll become like the rest of us. I never became like the rest of them. And I now chair the Jake Scherwel Fellowship. I really want them to come into Namibia. The Jake Scherwel Fellowship takes the brightest and most dedicated young people in high schools who say they want to become teachers, and we put them through a wraparound program in teacher education while they're doing their first degree, so that by the time they graduate, they are the outstanding change makers in our schools. If any of you want to come and visit, or if I can tell them, Charmaine, to come here, I'll send the team. But I think you need to develop a model in which you get young people who are resilient into the teaching profession. Number 4, despite what I said about 4IR, it is really important to have an enabling environment, because the schools are still stuck in the 20th, if not the 19th century, right? In the meantime, the world is changing around them. So on the 27th of November, and again, if any of you are connected to technological innovation in Namibian schools, ma'am, I would pay for 2 of your colleagues to come to Cape Town because I've got all of the Google people there, all of the people who actually figured out. My task, my commitment to them was figure out how to make things like coding and machine learning and stuff like that realistic for poor schools. Don't tell me about Bishops and Westerford and all of these fancy schools. Tell me about how this works for poor kids. And we're going to do this. And the Western Cape government will give me 100 schools, and what we will do in the poorest, in townships like Kailicha, Marienburg, etc., and what we will do is to make sure that these kids learn ahead of the curve. Because whether we like it or not, the world is changing around them, and you have to have teachers who are able, and by the way, fire half of your lecturers, Dean, and get another half who are hooked into this stuff. You know, the ones teaching nonsense, life orientation or whatever you call it. Number 5, I heard the previous speaker talk about hunger for personal growth and professional development. Oh, why not? You know, I'm now 62 years old, and I've probably read every book in curriculum theory, which is my field. But you know that every single day I am still looking in order to learn, in order to do better, in order to make a better argument, in order to write a better book, because it is built into me that you don't arrive as a teacher. You're just constantly trying to improve your practice. So ladies and gentlemen, let me come with my mic again. Sir, you look like an educated man. If I came to your home tonight, what books would I find next to your bed? And please don't say the Holy Bible.
Die dier, jagluiperd.
Jagluiperd. You see, this is the point. And how do you, in a teacher education program, instill that idea of continuous development, or what policy people call lifelong learning? How do you embed the idea that, part and parcel of your education is to be, and if you're, I'm a high school teacher, so I don't know how this works really in primary schools, but it is important, and thank God for Google. I mean, there's any number of really good websites in which you can figure out 10 different ways in which to teach the life cycle of the fern. You don't have to do it the same way every time. You're trying to figure out how to improve. But that is a value system. That's not knowledge. That is an orientation towards knowledge that I think is very important to teach. I don't know how you get ahead without being part of professional networks. I don't know what those are in Namibia, but with the young teachers, I tell them, here are 3 science associations, at least one of them I'm going to give you money for subscription so that you can go to the conference of AMISA every single year and learn what's hot in math education and make sure that you're connected, etc., etc. With my doctoral students, I take a bunch of them every single year to 2 big conferences, the CIS and the ARA, to make sure that they know who the networks are. And my role as a professor is simply to introduce them to the greats in the field. Your role as a teacher educator is to introduce your students to people doing innovative work in their discipline, and so on and so forth. But you don't get ahead if you're stuck. What is this township just outside Windhoek here? With a K, I think. Karatura. If you're just stuck in Karatura and you're teaching the same bloody thing for 20 years, you're not going to develop. You're not going to grow. You're not going to make an impact. And I think it is very, very important to embed this notion of networks. And you've got to be determined to change what so many people take as given. So I've suggested, I'm just new at Stellenbosch. Stellenbosch is a really weird place. You mustn't come there, whatever you do. It's a bit of a bubble. I discovered half the people, you see, I grew up on the other side of the N2, which is a very different country to Stellenbosch. There's a lot of people in Stellenbosch I discovered who don't know there's a new government. It's quite isolated. It's quite isolated. Everybody speaks Afrikaans, whether you like it or not. In fact, I landed in trouble the other day at Die Boort. Anybody heard of Die Boort? Yeah, I went to Die Boort, and there, everybody, the white people, the colored people, they speak to you Afrikaans, even if you're from Harare or whatever. So the other day I got so, because I can speak Afrikaans, it's my second language, but I'm sensitive to other people's language needs, So these women were just telling this poor Harare guy, "Wat wil jy koop?" And the guy saying, "I don't understand." So I got fed up. So I shouted in the line, Excuse me, in English. How do you decide who speaks English and who speaks Afrikaans? I'll never forget what this woman did. They had to drag me out. I was laughing so much. She looked at me quizzically and she says, "Maar meneer, het so 'n Afrikaanse gesig." How the hell can you read my language of my phenotype? But that determination to change, I went to observe a student teacher the other day. The classroom looked as if a bomb had hit it at school in Stellenbosch. Look off. I said, Juffrou, I said to her in her language, how the hell do you teach? No, but there's a drawing. I said, that drawing is completely the dimensions of the kidney. It's completely out of whack with reality. I can get you the benches are broken. Listen, if you're going to, in a country like Namibia or in a country like South Africa or Zimbabwe, if you are going to train teachers, you can't just train them to teach science. You have to also train them to change the context within which science is taught and learnt. Otherwise, it's over. Focus on what is important. But I just don't know how we get there unless we think completely differently about the image of the 21st century teacher. I remind you again, all children can learn. All children have the capacity for powerful learning. Our job is to make that possible, not only as teachers, but as teacher educators. Because if we don't get it right, we all lose out. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Wow, 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 wow. It is powerful indeed. Let us give Professor Johnson one more round of applause. I think at this point, I'm just trying to get directions on it. Does it mean that we now first have the response from Dr. Pumuti before you go into the deeper plenary discussions? All right. So let us welcome Dr. Pumuti to respond. This is a heavy duty to respond to that, I can imagine. Dr. Pumuti, you are welcome.
Okay, the reason why I also took out this is because Professor Jonathan was my supervisor. So I tried to model his teaching, but I will not be able to do what he has done just now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to respond to the powerful speech from Professor Jonathan. He outlined successfully the characteristics of 21st century teachers, and he described these 7 theses. And I think this also appear elsewhere in the first speaker or keynote speaker. Then what I try to do, or maybe before I come then, he warned us by saying, don't start talking about 21st century teacher education before you fix the basics. What does that mean? It means if you want to build a house, but there's no foundation, forget about it. If you don't have a system which does not work, forget about trying to have a better system or to try to have more if the basics is not right. There, I truly agree with him. However, we are faced with a dilemma where you need a basic, but the society is ever changing. How are you going to catch up with the ever changing society if you first fix the basic? Maybe do it simultaneously. Imagine now you are building a house. You want, what is this tall building? Double story, and then you still also working on the foundation. It's a little bit shaky. But that is how life is. And what he said is that we should prepare our teachers also to be shaky. I mean, not to be shaky. They have to be resilient so that they are able to teach learners how to be resilient. All right. Now, when I was listening to him, I was thinking about what are the policies, what are the strategies that we have already in place, which we did not yet implement. Why? So when I compare the professional standard for teachers in Namibia, you know, this book, and what he talked about, there is a very thin line between what he described and what is in this book. And this book was written in 2006. Now we ask ourselves, why didn't we implement the competencies as outlined in this book? And then again, I compare what is in the Namibia National Professional Standard for Teachers and what is in the SADC Regional Framework for Teacher Professional Standard and Competence. It's more or less the same. And this was, I think, produced in 2018, 2019. Now the question is, how are we going to deal with this professional standard for teachers that was published in 2006 and the competency or whatever is coming out from this conference? That's a question. So it's actually, I'm going back to his point to say, fix. I'm not saying we are not going to get anything from this conference which will help us to review our curriculum to teach better. We should actually look at what is in place and why didn't we implement it? What will make us to implement the resolution that will come from this teacher education in Indaba? I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pumuti. I take with that response we have more questions than answers. Ladies and gentlemen, we now get into the next part of the plenary, which is the open discussion. We have sufficient time to take questions. May I, at this point, perhaps just find out if I should invite all the speakers back to the podium? Is that correct? Right, can I invite all the speakers to please come to the podium? Professor Jonathan, Saneth.
You stay. At this point, we would just like to, as a small token of appreciation, hand over to gifts to our keynote speakers. But I also believe it's the Edie's birthday today, so shall we sing for her? Okay, let's do that. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Edie. Happy birthday to you. Yippee, hooray! Ealing, Professor Ealing, please come forward so we can give you a gift. Are there no cameras and people take pictures here anymore? Hello? You just take pictures when it's the minister? Thank you, Ealing. Prof, there's something for you. We hope you'll be able to have it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So now it's
All right. Thank you, Dr. Villette, for that intervention. Let us proceed then to the session. Deals with open questions, responses to the plenary. I would like to invite comments, questions from the floor. Okay, just for a moment. Thank you, Dean. All right. Anyone? Let me start on this end. Any questions? Yes. One. In the middle here. Any responses? Any questions? All right. This section. So 1, 2, 3. Can we take this round? Can we take this round and then we will have another round? We have sufficient time before lunch. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lowe. There's just one, I just need some clarity. When you spoke about competencies, knowledge, skills, attitudes, and so on, you mentioned disposition. Could you maybe just expand a bit on what you meant by disposition as a competency? And then maybe just as a second part, you spoke about lifelong learning, and Prof. Johnson also spoke about continuous professional development. But I think in terms of schooling, and because of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, I think self-directed learning is very important. And when we just, after independence, we had a whole big thing about a teacher being a facilitator, and a teacher's, there was a problem with that term. But I think that's become more and more relevant because the knowledge is so much more that we need to become a facilitator so the learners can learn to self-direct their own learning. And I think that this aspect is not receiving enough attention in education.
Right, thank you. I think there was another hand this end. Yes, just the gentleman at the far end there.
Right. Thank you very much. I think my point will go to the first presenter. I'm Abba James, my name. Now, going back to the attributes of the 21st century teaching profession, in terms of potential to, mentoring, the potential of the child, I just want to seek from you, maybe if you have a practical guide in terms of advising us, the teachers. Now, the challenge I have as a person, which I have also seen in my student, the overpopulation. Now, where you have the genuine interest, at least to guide the learner, and you have more than what you can cope with, how do you manage in trying to go around them so that their potential can actually be maximized? Now, I'm talking against the recent background. I went to a particular school to assess a student. I see the practical passion the learner, the teacher has. In fact, if you see the level of stress appearing on her face, you sympathize with her. While she was trying to coordinate the classroom, some groups were dancing here. She get to that side. These ones were partying. Now, I come back. I called the support teacher. How is this learning process taking place? How are you supporting this, our student teacher? Because at the end of the day, we expect that the feedback from here will also help us to strengthen our practice back in the classroom. She said, my son, you have seen it with yourself. That they have been talking, that this is supposed to be 3 classrooms. Even the teacher has no space to stand. Myself, who went there as an assessor, I remained on my feet throughout the process because there was no space. Now, in this condition, where the student does their activities, maybe might be predicated on something, just like the prof was showing us the picture of the granddaughter. There could be something out of it. But because of the helpless situation the teacher found herself, there was no time to actually interrogate or maybe interact with these learners. What is it that is funny or maybe that push you in doing this or that while the teaching is going on? So that, I don't know, from that particular point, if there could be a practical evidence or perhaps advice that the first speaker might share with us so that it will also help us to push around and perhaps try to see how we also manage this particular situation. Otherwise, at the end of the day, it will still go back to the theory. I'm sorry to use that, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, let us try to keep the questions to almost concise and directed. I think on this end, I had 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Yes, indeed. So someone can assist there, please.
Good morning. My name is George Kandetu, the principal of MH Primary School. I want immediately to be associated with the 2 learners that spoke this morning. They really did me very proud. I have only, it's really not questions, but maybe an extension of what the executive director have said, and that is concerning the fact that as educators or teachers or principals, we ignore the most important stakeholders, which are the parents. After having agreed so, there is also a cry out from us as teachers, principals, educators, that it's not in all platforms that we as very important implementers are left out in some of the important decisions that are taken. And I think, or it's my view, that cripple the implementation of whatever policy that we have put in place. Many times I have heard about we are very good at policy making, but very poor at the implementation thereof. But at many platforms where I sit, we do not spend enough time to craft strategies of how to implement policies that we have crafted. And it is my appeal that this conference will specifically look at how do we implement whatever policy that we have crafted. And hereby, I also mean that we walk a mile together in terms of implementation. Because sometimes we leave it over to implementers to implement, but there is no way or no structure of how to do it and no evaluation of how it is done. Secondly, I want to concur with Professor Johnson.
Sorry, the first one just a comment. Is that correct?
It was a comment, and it is an appeal for us also to think about it.
Okay. So the second one is a question, I hope.
The second one is also not a question, because if I remain in questions, I might be negative, and I want to be progressive in this platform. The second one is about the fact that we should address conditions before we expect learners to perform. So the environment must be addressed. And the professor talked about the school situation or the classroom situation. My appeal is for this conference to also look to other factors outside the school. For example, the society. The society has become even more rotten than ever before, and that has an influence on the schools that we are leading. For example, MHKF is in an environment where it is prone to drug abuse and all that. And we see that coming through into schools. So I want this conference also to interrogate that aspect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Those two appeals are noted. I have one more, 1, 2, and then two gentlemen at the back. I think after that, we will allow the panel to respond so that we keep it shorter. Please keep your questions short, your comments as short as possible.
All right. Thank you. My name is Mr. Jomita. I'm a teacher at Emma Grief Primary School. I also want to be associated to those learners who spoke there because I've taught them English as a second language. All right, yeah. I'm honored to be here. My lecturers, I'm also a product of the University of Namibia Commonwealth campus. My lecturers are right here in front of me. Mrs. Kambonde taught me English as a second language, yes. My question is, how does the university, as a teacher preparing body, we spoke about values and the skills, prepare, ensure that we really have a quality teacher. Apart from lecturing and internship, what else is there a strategy that is in place to change someone who registered to study in the teaching profession just for the salary? Is there an intervention that can ensure that a teacher is transformed before they reach the classroom? Thank you.
Thank you. Who is the question directed to? Anyone?
Yes, all the professors.
Okay. Thank you so much. Two more, then we give the panel opportunity to respond.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elago from UNAM Faculty of Education. This is directed to Professor Low. I'm curious, and I'm sure the two ministries represented here would be, to know more about how your country could cope with 360 schools for your size of population, which is double ours, and we don't seem to cope with the number of schools that you have. 5 times the number, particularly related to teacher-learner ratio. And the second question is, what have you found to be the optimal classroom size for your STP? Now, I'm asking that question with relevance to the curriculum review or overhaul that UNAM is embarking upon. I'm sure the answer would have some bearing on what we might want to implement.
Thank you, Dr. Alago.
Thank you. My question is for Prof. Low. Health is the biggest asset of a child. My question is coming from, I'm a Faculty of Education at UNAM. I'm Silas Wilders. I'm responsible for physical education. My question is, physical activity and physical education is part of public health. And it's the most neglected asset of all the nations in their school systems. How do you integrate that into your education system, and how do you foresee that role of physical activity and physical education in the future as a human right of our children?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Aveba Johannes Wesep, Regional Director of Education, Arts and Culture in the Koras Regional Council. Professor Jonathan Johnson, you indicated that your first language or your mother tongue is not Afrikaans, that it is in fact your second language. Now, I want to know, for a 21st century teacher, we are living in multilingual communities, and in our schools we have that challenge whereby the hegemony of the former colonial languages is so strong that our children are being taught through the use of either English, the second language, as a medium of instruction, or Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. What I would like to know from you is which language were you taught in during your foundation phase? And how did it impact on your future learning as a learner? And how do you see the reality of this multilingualism as a challenge for the 21st century teacher who is teaching in a hegemonious community? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We give now opportunity to the panel members to respond. I will start on this end and we'll go towards the end of the table. Professor Jonathan, your responses, please.
Thank you. Let me start with the issue of multilingualism. Now, it's been a long time since I've done the research in Namibia, so I'm not as up to date with the language debates and practices and policies here. But I can tell you that certainly where I come from, you're sitting with a problem. On the one hand, the political system and indeed the policy arrangements suggest that children should learn in the mother tongue up to grade 3, I think, and then transition into English in grade 4. Here's the difficulty. I have not yet met a black parent or mother in any of the 9 provinces that wants their kids to be taught in the indigenous language, not once. And the rationale behind that is really compelling. They look at how the economic system is organized, they look at how the political system is organized, and they understand that the sooner my kid gets competency in English, the better. Now, you and I might disagree about that pedagogically, for example, that it is actually much better, in theory, to have kids really well-grounded in the mother tongue and then transition to another language later. But in practice, you can't get that done. It doesn't help when the people in power, if you look at all our parliamentarians, not a single one of our parliamentarians puts their kids in a school where they learn the indigenous languages. They put their kids in English schools, private and public. So the message that comes out at that level is, here's your shortcut to success, English. Then there's just another reality, and we've got good research on this, fortunately. The reason children fare poorly in South African schools, and we, as you know, we often get the worst results in science and math, and in polls recently with language. The reason our students really fare poorly in the primary schools is because whether you teach them in the mother tongue or in English, they taught poorly anyway. In other words, there's no advantage. There's no advantage as a result of the immersion in of the mother tongue advantage. In my own case, I don't know if that was a personal question. We were raised in English. All the schools I went to were in English, so it's never been an issue for me in terms of etc. I just want to come to the question of self-directed learning, and indeed something that Namibia, Botswana, South Africa all spoke about at the dawn of democracy, which was the issue of learner-centeredness. Now we know that that is a fantastic idea, but we also know you can't just tell teachers, okay, to give up their authority in the classroom towards kids without preparing them to do that, without instilling them a sense of confidence in the subject, without making sure that the pedagogical routines that we expose them to are established early so that they're able to do that without fear, okay? And I've just, again, as a science teacher, I've just seen over and over and over again, even recently, how an experiment that lends itself to kids taking charge, okay, becomes the teacher telling them what's going to happen next, and so on and so forth. So it destroys the whole idea of self-directed learning. So how do you fix that? The only way I know how to fix that is to make sure that in our teacher education programs, whether you call these things simulation laboratories or something else, that you enable a student to see how it's done. You enable the student to see how you do multigrade teaching. You enable the student to see what is possible under conditions of constraint. Otherwise, you know, the student would never have seen that in the 12 years of apprenticeship. Remember, it's the only profession, ours, in which you have 12 years of looking at teachers, and then you have to decide. You don't look at 12 years at lawyers, you know, practicing, or physicians. And then you go through a conventional teacher education program, and again, I don't know what you do at UNAM, and there it might also just be the traditional teaching. So it's to be able to create, the University of Johannesburg, for example, has created a school in Soweto that does exactly that, you know, which is the University of the Free State, where I was, created on the South Campus, something like that. In other words, you create opportunities for student teachers to see how it is possible to manage large classrooms, do learner-centered instruction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But again, you cannot do that in Southern Africa off a low base of subject matter knowledge. If your subject matter knowledge base is already fragile, it's really hard to tell that teacher in their world to give over the leadership of learning to a kid. That, as we've seen very, very clearly in the work of Richard Tabulawa in Botswana, the University of Botswana, who's probably the expert on that subject in this part of the world. I've only been to Singapore airport, so I can say nothing about the interesting questions you have for Professor Lowe. Let me just say this about physical education, though, since I'm just finishing a book with a student on the role of sports and physical education at the University of the Western Cape in the first 2 decades of its existence. It's true across the world, as you correctly infer, that physical education isn't regarded as a high-status subject. So people talk about science and math, but they don't talk about physical education and music. That's true almost everywhere, okay? And one of the reasons that subjects like that find it difficult to get purchased in schools is that they don't often have a political base for organizing and demanding to be taken seriously. That, for me, is the single most important reason. Physical education, as you correctly said, it's not just a health issue. I mean, it has so many other benefits, you know, social benefits, for example, that enable young people to do well in learning, you know, just by being able to better. But school subjects rise and fall, and there's a chap who did the historical research on this, man called Ivor Goodson. Please read his book. School subjects on the margins rise and fall. It's like gender studies at universities. You know, you'll see it's very often a joke because management doesn't take it seriously to begin with. So those subjects or fields rise and fall depending on whether there is a political movement that is prepared to give it. In other words, don't depend on an intellectual argument, okay? When people say there's no money, you have to find politically ways of making it an issue. And then finally, let me just say, since this is something that I think about a lot, when South Africans, and I think Namibians also say this, you know, we have good policy, but the problem is implementation. Let me just tell you something. A policy is not good if it doesn't anticipate implementation. In other words, it's not a good policy if it hasn't worked through at least its theory of action. That is, how is this policy going to work in practice for those who are most disadvantaged by circumstances. So don't let government get away with saying, oh, we have this, it's like South Africa, you know, you've got this wonderful constitution. Okay, they say, but it's not actually a wonderful constitution when you're killing each other, you know, at a rate higher than in any other part of the region. It's not a good constitution when women get battered every single day in large numbers across the provinces. So a policy is only good to the extent that it finds purchase in practice. And so linking those two ideas, I think, is very, very important in pursuing change.
Okay, yes, I would like to respond to two questions. One question is about the value and attitude and how this can be integrated into, or why this cannot be integrated into teacher education. If you recall that I refer to National Standard of Professional Standard for Teachers, where I analyze and check which competency actually related to value and attitude, and why perhaps cannot or were not implemented. You see that it actually comes from the way we believe about what is knowledge. Yeah? So if we believe that value and attitude is not their kind of right knowledge, and therefore teachers or student teachers should not learn about that, and we cannot actually integrate those values into our mathematics or science, then we leave that competence out. The same with teachers. When they teach, they also make choice about what to teach and what not to teach, and what influence that choice is about their beliefs. On the other hand, is that I believe that learners or student teachers can only learn about values and attitude from their teacher educators, from teacher education lecturers. And the way we teach, the way we interact, the way we work together, or a student teacher will then model that, and they will be able to do the same when they go to the workplace. So it's not a matter of necessarily write a module or write a study guide about skills and values, but it's what we are doing. I also want to say that something that I observe is that the fact that most of us teacher educators, we are not really aware of the knowledge or the experience of what is going on in the classrooms. We assume that what we are teaching is what is going on in classrooms. Therefore, it is really important that when we teach or when we implement whatever what we are going to review, we need to do more research to understand what is going on in classrooms, rather than just continue assuming that's what is happening in the classrooms. When it comes to multilingualism or multiculturalism in Namibia, is something that we totally ignore. And it's continue haunting us because we ignore it. We thought it's going to go away with national reconciliation, and then we just accept each other and things will just be okay. I think it's the right time now that we start talking about multiculturalism, we start appreciating our culture, and we integrate our different culture in our education system, especially in teacher education, so that the student teacher appreciate the culture of one another, and therefore they will be able to face the multicultural classrooms. Because we don't know how these teachers are suffering when they are faced with learners from different language backgrounds. and we don't talk about it in our teacher training.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be brief, but address as much of the questions that were directed to me. I'll start with the dispositions. For me, the dispositions, and as well as articulated in the literature, would refer very frankly to the professional ethos of the teacher, the code of conduct of the teacher being, and the teacher personhood. So it is really, for me, the demonstration of the values, the skills, attitudes, knowledge coming together in the form of teacher dispositions. The next point had to do with professional development, that it ought to be very self-directed. I totally agree. I think in one of my slides, although I was rushing like a train, I did mention that in innovative pedagogies, it's really about scaffolding for self-directed learning. Nonetheless, our Singapore Ministry of Education also doesn't leave it to chance, and policy-wise has helped teachers to embark on a lifelong journey of professional development by providing them with 100 paid hours of professional development time every single year. But it is self-directed in that teachers can choose what they would like to hone their skills in according to the desired outcomes of the 21st century teacher. That is called the teacher growth model, which I didn't have time to talk about. And there are courses listed under ethical educator, community builder, competent professional, to name a few. So these are things that the system can do, but I totally agree with you that the whole value about lifelong learning, and it's a mindset that we need to help to, bring out the best in our teachers, just as we are trying to bring out the best in our students. The next thing is about learner-centeredness. For us, I think, let me give a very real example, because I think that was the question. Can you give us a real example? So learner-centeredness for us is not just a motherhood statement. It is really the belief that every learner can learn, even if it is at their own pace, own time, and own target. So within the Singapore system, which had for years been very driven by, tests of student achievement in terms of summative assessment scores, we have thought long and hard about this and have taken it very seriously. So for example, we have specialized schools like Northlight School, Pathlight School, and the principal who set up Northlight School is today our Deputy Director General of Education, professional development for our teachers today, because she was in charge of this school where it's very interesting that only pupils who have failed their primary school leaving examination at least twice can gain an entrance into the school. So there's a long waiting list where everybody really wants to go in. But she has a way of bringing out the best in each of her students, and admittedly, the curriculum that they go through, having not cleared the primary school leaving examination, is rather vocational: hairdressing, cooking, hotel management, catering, so on and so forth. But because she is very diligent, and she has always recited this story that I'll never forget, she had a lot of students that she tried to personally visit, but they would know, and the friends of the student who didn't want to come to school would warn the student, so he would always lock up his flat and not be contactable. But she thought of day after day putting McDonald's breakfast outside. I know we'll get to physical education in a while and physical well-being, but it was her love and her not giving up and she would always check if the McDonald's breakfast was taken. And one day she found that it was actually brought in, and that was when she decided to talk. She had a gateway to talk to the student. So this is really a real life lived experience of not giving up on any single student, even if they have persistent absenteeism. Because very often we know that persistent absenteeism is symptomatic of something deeper, of what they're going through, either in school or at home. So that's about learner-centeredness. The third point has to do with gateways. And I think the executive director later on can pick up on this, because every system is different. So for us, very interestingly, before the start of pre-service, we already have some gateways to check for teacher attributes and suitability. For example, we have something called the compulsory teaching stint or the enhanced school experience, or in the literature it's called early field experience, where student teachers are placed into schools for as short as 4 weeks or as long as a year, 6 months to a year. And really at that point, and they are untrained, and it is deliberate because we have read up a lot that the compulsory early field experience stint is extremely important. So every single student teacher goes through it. So at that stage is the first gateway. If they demonstrate very poor role modeling, being very rude, can't turn up on time, do not dress professionally, these are reasons that many of them drop out, or some of them drop out. But within our system, we also have developmental phases for the practicum, which is school experience for 2 weeks at the end of the first year of study, teaching assistantship for 5 weeks at the end of the second year of study, teaching practice 1, 5 weeks at the end of the third year of study, and the final practicum, which is is for 10 weeks or almost the whole of the second semester of the fourth year. What is very interesting is at teaching practice 1, which is really beginning to be quite serious, we have a general principle. If there's a discrepancy between the school grading and the institute NIE supervisor's grading, and it's a fail, in other words, we call it a discrepancy fail, we tend to go with a fail because we believe that the student teacher needs more time to develop. So I think that's very interesting. It's the same as well at teaching practice 2. We do have a lot of gateways. As they enter into the profession, there is what is known as the Enhanced Performance Management System, which serves both as an appraisal tool every year, but it also stands for, it's a holistic professional development tool to talk about setting of goals, how to realize those goals, and to professionally talk about what I mentioned, the current estimated potential of the teacher, which track they can eventually go to, and how to further develop them. So again, thanks to the McKinsey & Co.'s publication, I can quote this publicly, otherwise it's a very secret, confidential ministry document. The appraisal system is published in a McKinsey & Co. report 2009, where teachers are graded from A to E, and accordingly, they are given performance bonuses or merit increments, depending on how well they've performed. There is also what is known as performance review, and my internal joke is that D is for door, E is for exit. So we do believe in upholding quality in our system, and with it comes a rather strict appraisal system, because our principle is very simple, and I think you all resonate with the same thing. One bad teacher is one too many for the classroom. We cannot afford to get it wrong. So we take this very seriously. The fourth point is exciting and interesting. You are right, and we were just talking about this with the ED. The math doesn't add up. Your population is huge. Your schools are very few. This has only one thing. It means that we have very large class sizes. And it is true, we have very large class sizes, even though we're very well resourced. And this is really because, honestly, international research, even by the OECD and the Thales study, has not been able to prove definitively whether really smaller class sizes bring about greater gains in student achievement. So I can give you what our typical class sizes are like. For elementary 1 and 2, we really try to keep it below 30 to 25 to 27, that sort of thing, because they need more time to develop. But to be very honest with you, from elementary 3 onwards and secondary schools, you will see classes of 40 to 45 to one teacher, or maybe one teacher and one teaching assistant, together with mainstreaming of a few students with special needs in a class. It's not uncommon. As to whether we will change this in the future, I'm not sure. If the ministry asks me for my professional considered opinion, I would say that although class sizes hasn't been shown to bring about definitive gains in student learning outcomes, I do believe that having a smaller class size can help student teachers build a very strong relationship, which has been shown to be very important for bringing about the 21st century kind of education system that we were looking out for. I think at this juncture, our distinguished professor will not be extinguished. We just want to wish him well. It was a real pleasure. The passion is something that we all see. So it brings me nicely to the final point about physical education. I'm sorry that in the shortness of the presentation, I wasn't able to talk about physical education in our classrooms. To be honest with you, our teacher education college started as a teacher training college back in the 1960s, but as early as the 1980s, we even set up the College for Physical Education. Today, they are all together in one. Since 1991, as part of the National Institute of Education. We take physical education very seriously. Within my course, physical education is known as a specialization. They go through physical education teachers go through a very rigorous physical proficiency test before they can come in. And for the 4-year program, we do have teachers who are being prepared for the physical education specialization as well. And then for the 1-year program, which is the postgraduate diploma in education program, only for physical education, to show you how seriously we take it, it's considered 2 years. And the ministry funds the teachers for 2 years. Everybody else is 16 months, just a little bit more than 12 months. But only for the physical education teacher, it's 2 full years, with the understanding that even if you have come from the university with any other degree, apart from sports science, for example, you do need to be honed in the academic discipline of physiology, biomechanics, etc., to bring out the best in the future students. So we take it very seriously. And on this point, I'd also like to say that, again, I didn't have a chance to fully articulate Education 2030. There is a component called well-being, which is going to take effect. So in the 21st century, we must not underestimate the importance of not just physical well-being, but mental well-being as well as financial well-being. So moving forward, I really think that the role of teacher educators and teachers has got to take very huge strides, including role modeling what it's like to have a very healthy diet and healthy lifestyle with regard to exercise. I'll be the first to admit that I don't have that because of being too busy, although I do track my steps thanks to iPhone. But these are things I was really thinking about. And I think that teacher education programs need to include how we can get future teachers to be very conscious. It's not just about exercise, but things like health screening. It's a responsibility to the community. Because we all know that even for very serious diseases, early detection gives you a very high chance of recovery, for example. Financial literacy is another skill that is extremely important for young people, right? It's not about how much you earn, but how much you can save up for your retirement, for example. And of course, mental well-being, which we cannot ignore in this day and age where so much of how the young person turns out is very much determined by how well they're accepted in social media, for example. So the whole concept of well-being is very much linked to the point that was raised about physical education and well-being as well. So I think I've covered most of the points and very happy to pass on to Edie to speak.
No, there's nothing for me.
All right. Thank you for the responses. It's 1 o'clock on my watch. That means in terms of our program, we've just approached lunch. But just if there is perhaps one burning question, I would allow it. Just one. It has to be a game changer. It has to be a serious game changer. Okay, I would go with 1, 2, and 3, and that's it. We close. Is that fine? Thank you so much. Roaming mics.
And that has to do with how you are downgrading in terms of examinations. In a lot of what I see, there's a little bit of dilemma between what we teach, what we examine, how we examine, and if we are going to already our curricula for both schools and universities are very cramped. We think learners should know a lot, and our focus is so much on content and then the examination thereof. And I mean, personally, I think it kind of curbs the innovation and creativity, because the teacher is focused on that examination, the lecturers are focused on that examination, the learners are focused on that examination, because it is seen as the be end of it all, yeah? Because that's going to make you move to the next thing. The other thing I have, it's also time consuming. For example, at the university, we spend 2 months writing exams, one in June, one in now. We could have been using that we need time to be creative. We need time to, and then also, it's costly. People have to be paid for exams and blah, blah, blah. And the schools have now downgraded in terms of the amount of external examination. My question to you is, how does that contradict or not contradict, but how does that, how do you balance that, what Prof. Jansen was talking about, that is a need for teachers and for everybody else to have, there's low base content knowledge that is important in order to be creative, in order to be, where's the balance? And how do we get there? How do we make people's minds change that when part of the reason why people don't think physical education is important is there's no exams connected to it, yeah? And where there's exams and the more rigorous the exams are, the more we think that those are important. How do we create that balance?
Thank you for the question. We said 2 on this end and we close. 1 and 2.
Mine is just a follow-up on the well-being. We know that the child should develop holistically. I would specifically, we know that the general classroom teacher should give attention to the psychological well-being, as you have been pointing out. But we are also aware that due to the complexities of our modern life, we have more and more learners kind of falling through the cracks. Those who have might think about suicide, those who fall pregnant, those who are severely depressed, those who are having real stress because of the school demands. I just want to find out, within your system, do you also have teachers that you train specially to look at those more severe cases of psychological difficulties? Thank you. I'm Louise Mostert, and I'm from the Faculty of Education, UNAM.
I will really try to ask a question in a sentence. I want to ask, actually to Professor Jansen, I want to challenge him a little bit on the life orientation issue. Maybe Sanet or Herta can respond, because Mr. Kandetu indicated that there's a discrepancy between values that we want in the schools and the real values out there in Namibia, like these that parents are not doing the life orientation. How must we deal with that?
Right. Thank you for this round of questions. Final responses.
So quick final responses is, even though we have reduced the number of assessments, you realize that it's just the removal of the mid-year examinations. This means that the end-of-year examinations are still around. So one of the misconceptions that we've had to to address as a nation is that we're not removing examinations altogether, but removing over-assessing. So I think that, it's important to signal that at the end of every year there is examination, although we have not had very formal examinations for elementary 1 and 2 for many years already. So that's the first thing. But if you tell me how do we get there, we are, as you know, announcement of a policy is very recent. So we are now facing the challenge of having to change parental and teacher mindsets. And also, in a way, trying to help to hone teacher professional development in areas such as formative assessment, because it is extremely important that teachers need to know whether their students are learning in the absence of the traditional summative assessment. So they do need more assessment literacy skills as well. So that's very true, and mindset changes are important. What we're trying to do is also to have a lot of focus group discussions to listen to the parental concerns as well as the teacher concerns. The learners are not complaining. Okay, with regard to psychological well-being, we take it very seriously. So we do have within the Ministry of Education the educational psychology, what they call the psychological branch, and there is an ed psychologist that's available on demand by each school. Recently, we as the NIE also relaunched our diploma in school counseling program so that our school counselors, and every school has a school counselor, so that our school counselors can be properly prepared with a proper diploma certification in order to deal with all these issues that can take place at ground level in schools. So these are mechanisms that we have put in place for the system. And at the teacher education side, if you want to ask about student-teacher well-being, if it's an academic issue, their first port of call is the assistant dean for the program. So for each program that I run, namely the degree program, the diploma program, as well as the postgraduate diploma and education program, there's an assistant dean in charge. But very often the academic problems would surface other more serious problems. Then I also have an assistant dean for counseling. And that is very important because she's a trained counselor with a PhD in counseling. So she is sort of non-threatening. They go to her, and depending on the severity of their psychological problems faced, they can be referred either to the wellness clinic or to even more specialized attention. But as you all know, it's very difficult, and also we treat our students with giving them a lot of agency and choice, because sometimes you really can't mandate that somebody goes to see, let's just say, a psychiatrist if they don't want to. So but there are a lot of checks and balances in place. And I think this is something that all of us need to consider very carefully, which is the mental well-being of our students.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you for the question, ma'am. The issue around life orientation, in Namibia, it's called life skills. And we consider that to be a very important subject. So much so that we gave full-time appointed life skills teachers just for life skills. We've got counseling support groups. We are busy as a ministry reviewing the manuals that we have in terms of basic bereavement counseling and all other counseling issues. So it's not just the life skills teacher that is trained. There's also, like I said, the counseling support group of various groups of teachers that shows interest. More and more the teacher has taken the role of the parent. We can't deny that. And the parent needs to come to the drawing board. And we need to create platforms for the parent. Because we've seen that the traditional role of the teacher, it has totally shifted to a teacher also having to serve as a psychologist or a counselor. And so we do train. We have sports for development, as I said earlier, where specific values are being taught. And then, of course, value issues are integrated, specific values, principles, issues are integrated in not just the life skills subject, but cross-cutting. Then we've got the school governance and the social accountability and school governance rollout that we're busy with in the country. It started off in Hardap in Ohangwena, and it's now and has moved to 3 more regions, where we look into training of school boards in the mother tongue, and specifically getting the parent closer to us to get back to the issues of values. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think we've just come to the end of this session. Dr. Pumuti had just one last one. But just before you come in, Dr. Katila, are you here? Yes, can you just come so that we can conclude, because you were on the panel? whilst Dr. Pumuti is just very briefly.
Yes, I just want to add on the issue of the value and how the learners learn about this. The issue is that it's not good enough to talk about these values in the classroom or even having a life skill subject in the school curriculum. Is how the adult and parents model these values.
Thank you. So with that, I think let us give a round of applause to all the panel members. They've done a wonderful job. And thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience as well. Dr. Villette will guide us in terms of the logistics for lunch. Thank you indeed.